Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Please let me know if it's working, if you're here and you're live and you want to say hi. Please feel free to jump into the comments. I would love to know that you're here and you're watching. And we are going to jump right in to our subject today: how to keep people engaged online. And this is going to be maybe a little bit funny because we're going to be doing this as a live stream, which is going to be me talking at you. And that's not how I would recommend keeping people engaged online. Whether you are doing meetings, workshops, trainings, onboarding, anything like that, you don't want to necessarily just talk at people. So we are going to be talking about how to keep people engaged online, and we're going to hop into a few different sections today. So, here we go. Gonna get over to my setup. Oh goodness. All right. Okay. So, recently I was at a workshop and somebody asked me, how do you keep people engaged online? And I realized that I have a ton of ideas on this subject, and I think that there's a ton of bad habits out there in the wide world of online meetings, workshops, facilitations, sessions really that are existing online of any type. There is a ton of bad habits out there, and I don't know if there's a ton of concrete advice. So in this video, maybe even video series, I'm going to hopefully be able to share a bunch of insights that you can apply to your meetings to both understand better how to make them more engaging, how to keep people engaged, and how to have more like fun and enjoyment in our sessions. I think that a lot of people, they want, when we come together, we want to have a good experience. There's so many memes floating out there about how this meeting could have been an email, and that's because most meetings aren't things that people enjoy. So I hope in this video series, you'll be able to get an understanding of what we can do to change that. So I started today by creating a kind of a mind map of all of the things that we can understand about how to keep people engaged online. So let me show you that mind map. All right, so here's our kind of like wall of thoughts. Well, let's go over here. Yes, perfect. Okay, so when I thought about the subject of keeping people engaged online, there was a couple of different kind of major themes that came up. So we are going to start over here in the blue corner, and I call this wrong answers only. So these are the things that I think people do currently that I don't think are helpful to keeping meetings engaging. I think they're things that we do from a good place often, but they don't actually work to keep meetings engaging. So I'm going to go through a few of these things that I think are wrong answers to the question, how do we keep people engaged online? Okay, so the number one thing that I see people do to keep people engaged online is that they ask everyone to turn their video on. So if they're on Zoom, if they're on Zoom, they ask, oh my gosh, sorry, some tech glitches there. So if they're on Zoom, they ask people to keep their video on while they're on the meeting. And that is, I think, a very misguided way to encourage people to participate. One, some people really resent being on video. They don't have a good location. They don't have a good space to do it. I was talking to the person who cuts my hair, and he was saying he has to do any video that requires him to talk about the clients that he serves. He has to comply with HIPAA, and the only place he can do that in his house is the bathroom. So imagine having to do that, talk to your coworkers from a location that just feels awkward and uncomfortable to like invite people directly into. That's not going to be the case for everyone, but just know that for a lot of people, keeping their video on is something that actually drains their energy, their interest, and it doesn't necessarily encourage participation. What it often does is simply make them feel micromanaged and make us as presenters, facilitators, leaders feel like people are paying attention. But that's for us. It doesn't necessarily do anything for them. So keeping your video on is not a good way to encourage participation. It can be a way to invite participation, and we'll get into some strategies for like, if you have your video on, there are cool ways that you can get people to participate, but I don't think that it actually inherently increases participation all by itself. I think it can actually have the opposite effect, or can have a resentful effect with your group. But it can increase, and I will say, I believe this, like it can increase connection between people. It can make people feel like they're having a more synchronous experience when they get to see their coworkers or when they get to see each other. And that has real value, but it doesn't have participatory value like in and of itself, other than allowing us to like use gestures and facial expressions as a way to participate. But when most people think of getting people to participate, they don't actually include those in their list. So my number one wrong answer is, if everybody's video's on, then they're going to participate. I don't think that's inherent, and I don't think you should count on it. Other things that I see people do that I don't think are inherent to good participation in online meetings. Asking people questions in the large group, just throwing out a big question to everyone in the room and just seeing who answers. I know that people do this, that people ask big questions of the folks that they are facilitating, and sometimes we get responses, but it's often from only the people who feel either brave enough, willing enough, or who just are willing to participate in that session in that way. We get kind of the same voices over and over again when we ask questions just straight up into the large group. Oftentimes also it doesn't allow us to modulate kind of the vulnerability of the questions we're asking. It doesn't allow people to share in ways that might make them more free and open to share their ideas and thoughts. So keeping people in the large group the whole time, and then asking questions directly to the large group as like the initial way you ask questions, those are two things I see all the time because we want to get people participating, right? We ask people, hey, come answer this question. I'm going to throw it out to the whole group so that anybody can participate. But when we do that, we actually end up sinking the real possibility of people participating, or at least we don't do anything to help that likelihood go up. And I actually think it's one of the highest barrier or the highest kind of risk ways to ask people to participate is to just throw a question to the large group that anyone can answer in kind of any fashion. So while I see it all the time, I don't think it's a great strategy for getting a lot of participation. I think also arbitrary mandatory participation is another strategy that I see people use. So I have a friend who has a boss who really wanted people to participate more in their meetings. And so what their boss said was, everyone is going to participate in this meeting. So that's the mandatory part. And we're going to do it by going around in alphabetical order. That's the arbitrary part. Now, the idea of everyone, I want to hear everybody's voice in this meeting. I'm on board with that. I think that can be even like a valuable and important idea to like the overall structure or cohesion of a group, but doing it in an arbitrary way and making it mandatory for everyone to participate in the same way, I think is actually a way to really build resentment and to not get valuable, interesting, meaningful contributions. That is a way for people to feel like, okay, so I can only speak like after Andy, but before Belle. Like, why is this happening? And so that idea of creating kind of like an impetus for participation, that's a good idea. But doing it in ways that feel arbitrary or mandatory, and really kind of like pull people's agency away, I don't think is the solution. The last one, I think, well, actually, I'm going to do two more. One is icebreakers without a purpose. So icebreakers without a purpose. So just, I think something that people often do is they want to say, okay, we're going to do an icebreaker, and it's well-intentioned. It's to build the energy up in the room. But if I ask them why are you running an icebreaker? They would say, it seems like a good idea. And I think it's really important for your icebreakers to have a purpose, like a greater purpose. If it's I want people to know that they can participate and share, and that I'm going to be like supportive and energized by what they say, that could be a good enough purpose. If it's, I don't know what people are coming from beforehand. So when people arrive, I'm going to ask them a question that everybody can answer in a really low barrier way so that we're all kind of arriving and thinking together. That can be a great purpose too. But if you don't know the purpose of your icebreaker and you if you don't know the purpose of your icebreaker, your participants and the folks that you are leading are going to feel that. So ensuring that your icebreakers have a purpose, ideally a purpose that is attached to the larger kind of goal or theme of the meeting, that's going to help it feel a lot less arbitrary and a lot less mandatory. Last wrong answer to how do we keep people engaged online is going to be this quote. I'm going to stop early in order to respect everyone's time. So people often, I hear people say this idea of, I want to respect everyone's time. And we do that when we do that to say, we're going to start. I usually hear people say it often when they're starting like 5 minutes late, but not everyone has still arrived. So they say, in order to respect everybody's time, I'm going to go ahead and start us. And you're like, oh, okay, this is a weird, kind of uninspired way to start. And then often I hear people say that exact same thing in order to close. They'll say, well, I want to respect everyone's time to do X, Y, and Z. And my invitation and challenge to anybody who is running online meetings is the best way to respect everyone's time is to build a meaningful engagement in the first place. It's not to end early. It's not even necessarily to start on time, but it is to set up the meeting in a purposeful way that actually matters, that everybody was there, that their contributions made a difference, and that the stated goals and purpose of the meetings was met. So to respect everyone's time isn't to say the phrase, I respect everyone's time. To respect everyone's time is to actually put in effort, energy, and purposefulness to crafting a meeting, a session, an experience worth having. So that is what we're going to focus on and talk about for the rest of our video series here. Okay, so if you have more things that you see people do often in meetings that you think, oh man, this does not inspire confidence, this actually disrupts and gets in the way of my participation, please throw those in the comments below. I would love to hear what other things you see happening that you think people do in the name of participation, but actually get in the way of participation. Love to know. Okay. All right. So now that we've gone over the wrong answers only, let's hop to the next thing that I would say about keeping people engaged online. And that is to master your technology. So mastering technology. So we're going to talk a little bit here about smoothing out the experience, how I do that with these two pieces of technology, Stream Deck and OBS, and then why it's important to keep up with updates, and how that can just help you feel more confident on the platform. So when I started virtually facilitating, I had no idea what I was doing. I was one of those people who was thrown into the deep end, who did not understand how to do online meetings. And what I set about doing was first and foremost, understanding the technology that I was on. If you want to lead an engaging online meeting, understanding the platform you're using so that you feel confident using it and so that you can confidently help others use it is essential. And what I have found is that even going on 2.5 years into a lot of meetings being online for companies, for organizations for the first time, a lot of people still don't feel confident using the platforms that they're asked to use. They don't know the capacities of that platform. They don't think of the ways to use those capacities. And even the ones that they do use, they feel unsure if they're using correctly. And that experience really throws off the group. Like, imagine for a moment that you were in person. And every time someone got up to write on the whiteboard, they had to go searching around the room for a marker. Like, that energetic break of like, okay, they're about to tell us, like, we're going to make a list of ideas on the whiteboard. And they turn around and they are like, oh no, there's no markers. Where did I put those? And they have to go scrounge around the room. You would be like, dude, come on, come prepared, man. Like, let's have this be like a kind of seamless experience, right? And we do that. Most of the time we are screen sharing, we are opening a poll, we're using the chat. Like, we are those people scrambling around looking for a marker. So it's important for us to get confident with the technology so that we can keep the energy flowing throughout our session. Having energy kind of carry you through a session, I feel like, I don't know, the image that just came to mind is like, well, not a roller coaster in the sense you want a session to be a roller coaster, but in the sense that, like, when you go up and you come down, you want that inertia to carry you through the next bend, right? You don't want to get stuck on a corner. And anytime we, like, some of the smoothing out the experience and understanding the platforms that we're using, why that's so important is because it allows us to keep the energy that we're building throughout the entire session moving, us to carry us through difficult conversations or like challenging topics that we're getting into, or maybe even just like kind of boring reports that we all need to like look at and make sense of. So bringing the energy with you, it is important, and what we have to do in order to do that is smooth out the experience. So I think it's really important to spend time getting to know the platform that you're using. And I'm going to show you in a little bit all of the ways that the platform I traditionally use, which is Zoom, all of the different capacities of that platform, and there are many, in order to like help people have that smooth experience and all the different ways that you can use it. So I don't think we should underestimate mastering our technology. In that same vein, we have to keep up with the updates of that technology. Now, Zoom does a good job, I would say, of never breaking when an update happens, in the sense that if you use basically like the simple sides of the software, that always stays consistent. They tend to just add new things. But if you want to use any of those new things, or if you are on a platform that when they do a major update, it really changes the experience, you need to keep up to date with that so that you can help the people who are in the meeting. If you're leading a meeting, you're responsible for the like experiences of other people. And that isn't to say that like it all relies on your shoulders, but it just means that like if you're asking people to do something with a screen share, or you're asking people to use the chat, you need to be able to direct them to where that is, right? And you need to be able to kind of like coach them through all the things you're asking them to do. So keeping up with updates is also really important. And personally, I have found that there are two technologies that really help me like streamline my whole experience with technology. And that is Stream Deck and OBS. Stream Deck is this little guy. I think of this as my virtual co-facilitator. It allows me to control all of the things that Zoom can do. So chat, turning off my camera on and on, muting all the participants, sending messages into the chat. It allows me to do all of that with just touching buttons rather than having to click around on my mouse or copy and paste things into the chat. So that has been a game changer for me. And I find that allows me to make a much smoother experience for my participants. And there's another technology called OBS, and OBS allows me to change what people see as my Zoom window. So what you're watching right now on YouTube, I can actually have this exact same setup with my little, where's the point? There we go. With my little, with my logo right here, I can set that up. I can also do screen shares, and I can do this exact thing that you're watching inside of my little Zoom window. So OBS is super powerful, allows me to skip screen sharing altogether and just use my Zoom window as my screen share. And that has also helped me have my technology the experience feel more seamless, and also help me feel more confident. For me, when I'm in a Zoom and I go into screen share mode, I'm not seeing exactly what my participants are seeing. And every time that happens, it really throws me off. And that's why we have that great meme of like how it sounds every time somebody screen shares, which is like, let me share my screen. Okay, can everybody see my screen? Like that thing that we do is because we have no confidence that everyone can see your screen. But when you use OBS or any other webcam like software, the eCam softwares, you can actually just do it right inside your window and have this setup happen so that you can see and everybody can see the exact same thing. So I really like that. So I think mastering technology is kind of like maybe not necessary, but I would say like an exponentially helpful initial step to everything else we're going to talk about in terms of how to keep people engaged online. So once you've done that, once you've mastered technology, the last thing we're going to talk about before we get into some like really practical examples is we are going to talk about what facilitation means and why I'm kind of a facilitation geek, and why I think facilitation, well, let me say this a different way. Okay. So this question of how to keep people engaged online, to me, the answer is so often facilitation. And what I mean by facilitation, like the word facilitate comes from French, facile. I sound like Italian. This is why I don't speak other languages. So it means to make easy. Facilitate means to make easy. So when we're thinking about how can we keep people and get people engaged online, another way to think about that is how can we make it as easy as possible for people to be engaged? And these are a few, I would say, like really important parts of helping people make it as easy as possible for people to be, stay, and get engaged online. Okay, first thing we're going to talk about is let them know that participation is expected. So what I mean by this is sometimes when I see people change their meeting culture, they're going from like a meeting where most of the time one person is going to be talking at other people. Maybe there's a couple of different people in the meeting that are going to be talking, but like their participation really isn't necessary. When people change that and all of a sudden they're adding a lot more participatory elements, people are unprepared. So it's important to let people know ahead of time, hey, this is a really participatory meeting. That means I'm going to ask you questions. There's going to be opportunities for live polling, for breakout rooms. And what I've found is letting people know that ahead of time ups the likelihood that they're going to be prepared for that. Because some people multitask their online meetings, whether that's listening in the car or that's, they're making dinner and so they've got other things going on, but they're tuning in. So when you are changing that up, let people know. This is what I mean by participation, and this is what I'm going to be asking of you when you come to this gathering. If you're not used to that, it's a really important step to making people, to inviting people to engage, okay? Couple of the other things that I think make it easy is when you ask people questions, asking people questions is one of the main ways that you invite people to participate. And when you do that, I think there are two things that you need to ask yourself as the person who's leading the meeting or the facilitator. Does their answer to this question matter? Am I just asking for the sake of asking, or is it actually going to be useful, interesting, meaningful information for this meeting? Not every time does it have to shape the outcome or the direction of the meeting, but it can't, when you ask people for their input and then you just never use it or refer to it or it has no impact, people feel like, well, there's no real reason for me to keep sharing because you're not using the information. So I think it's important when we ask for people's input to have that input matter. The other thing that I think is really important is that you shouldn't ask questions that you wouldn't answer yourself. So when you're thinking, like, is this an appropriate question to ask? Is this one that people are going to have answers to? If you can't think of an answer, unless it's like a technical question that you're asking a particular part of your team, then that's not a good question to ask. You should be willing, able to answer your own questions. And if you're asking people to think of the answer on the spot, then you should also be able to think of the answer on the spot. So that's just like a little filter in terms of what kinds of questions kind of make it easier for people to participate. And the last thing, which is going to segue us nicely into the next section, is we want to think about how. How are we inviting people to participate? I think most meetings right now don't, let me say that again. I think most meetings right now deal with a very narrow set of questions. Mostly, I think like on the whole, most meetings deal with the question, when? When are we meeting? If there's a set time, if it's, every Wednesday at 2:00, that's when we're meeting. Or if it's getting everybody's calendars to sync up, like that's the main initial question that I see everybody answer. And some people literally don't answer other questions about the meeting. It's just, when does it happen? And that's it. It's happening. I would say a level 2 meeting, like something that is like slightly more intentional and like dealing with a little bit more of the specifics, is what are we doing in this meeting? What is the purpose? What is the goal? What is on the agenda? And when people start building those things out, you can have much more effective meetings because you understand, like, what are we gathering for? What is the information we need to share or get or create together? And there's kind of like a clear purpose to the meeting, right? A clear purpose and a clear set of like things we need to get through. So I would say level 2 meetings deal with what. And just going from like, when are we meeting to what are we meeting about is a huge leap. And I think a really fundamental one in terms of helping people run better meetings, right? But I think the magic happens and engagement really goes up when we start asking how, right? So not just what are we doing, but how are we doing it? Okay, we need to have a discussion about the budget and how we're going to allocate funds for the scholarships that we got. Okay, how are we going to have that discussion? Is it going to be the whole group? Are we going to start in pairs? Are there different aspects to the discussion we need to plan? We need to make a decision on the priorities for the events for the next quarter. How are we going to make that decision, right? As soon as we go from just what to how, we can start thinking and even optimizing for the ways to keep people engaged, the ways to elicit participation from everyone, and we can run fundamentally better meetings. So let's talk about some of the hows. Let's talk about some of the hows that I think can build engagement, can keep people engaged, and can really make like a fundamental difference when you're running online meetings. I'm going to take a sip of water here, and I also need to like fix something really quick with our screen share so I can hop over to Zoom to show you some of these hows. And for anybody who's watching live, if you have a question at any point, please do feel free to throw that in the chat. I will monitor that, and I'll try to do my best to answer it as we go. Okay. All right. Okay, so we have talked about so far, to recap, we've talked about the things I see people do that are not ideal in terms of gaining participation. We've talked about the importance of mastering your technology, and we've talked about how a mindset, I think is what I would say, a mindset for approaching getting participation is about thinking about how can we make it easy, with emphasis on the how. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hop us over to talk about creative ways to use online platforms. I'm going to specifically be talking about Zoom. I would say many of the things that I'm going to talk about are going to be things that you could use on Teams, on Meet, on those kind of like basic kind of like go-to video platforms. So I'm going to talk about Zoom because that's the one I use, but I would say a lot of these are going to be transferable to many, many of the kind of go-to video platforms and probably all of the more ambitious ones that are out there. And I'm going to talk about creative ways to use the platform. So there are some like basic ways that most people use. There are some basic ways that most people use video platforms. Most of us use the kind of video on and off feature, and sometimes the video on is mandatory, which I've talked about previously. I don't think is a good way to encourage participation. It's a good way to, make people feel micromanaged, and it can be a good way to create connection. But I do think mandatory video on is a good way to build resentment. So I think, in just a few minutes, I will give you a way to get people to turn their camera on without you having to require it. And that creates like a fun reason to turn their camera on. So keep tuned for that. But what I want to talk about now is creative ways to use the Zoom platform or online platforms beyond the microphone on and off, video on and off, and even like specific ways you can use that to create more purposeful engagement on Zoom. So let's get into actually, we're going to start here with a list that I made in one of my sessions with folks. And let's see how it comes up. Okay, that looks pretty great. So one of the things to remember about online meetings is that there are many, many ways to get people to participate. Most of the time, when people think about participating in online meetings, they think about getting people to say things out loud in front of the large group. For a lot of us, that is what we think of with participation, and that might be the only thing that we think counts as participation. And I think one of the first things we should do when we think about this question, how do I keep people engaged online, is to think about what are all of the different forms of engagement or participation. So I asked people that question in a meeting that I led, and here is what we came up with. So here are all of the ways to participate. Facial expressions, type into the chat, ask a question, observing, just like watching and listening, being like an active observer is a way to participate. Emojis, having your camera on, annotating screen shares, amplifying what other people are saying, maybe like repeating what they're saying in the chat, or even saying, I saw something that was in the chat that I want to amplify into the room. Doing polls, that could be live polls, could be built into the software, having small group people who are in charge of their breakout rooms, gestures, being physical objects brought on screen, like tell us something that's like weird or meaningful that's on your desk, and maybe holding up an object in physical space, and then being part of the like notes and support team. So just the idea and remembering that there are just so many ways to get people to participate, not just out loud in front of the full group, I think can be a really helpful first step to thinking about how can we build participation. So if we want to move a little bit beyond that, let's talk about some other things we can do. So where should we start? Maybe we'll start with some of the basics and we'll kind of work up to more, I would say, like advanced uses of the platform. So this might look weird for just a minute, and it's just while I get something set up here. Okay. Whoa. Great. Okay. So I'm going to bring this in a little bit so you can actually see my Zoom. So you can see the chat is really what I mean. Perfect. Okay. So I'm in a Zoom, and this chat box, I think, can be an incredibly powerful tool for getting people to participate. We often encourage people to use the chat, but there are a few specific ways that I encourage people to use the chat in my sessions that I think really encourage and invite participation. So one of those things is something that I call chatterfalls, or a chat storm. So this is when I will have everybody open up the chat, and I will say, okay, what I want you to do is I want you to type in a response to the question that I'm about to ask, and I don't want you to hit send. I'm going to ask you to hit send once we've all had a chance to type that in. So what that does, giving people a chance to like type it in ahead of time, does a few things, right? One thing it does is that it allows people to think without seeing everybody's responses. That means that we can think for ourselves more independently. It also means that we don't feel like our response is bad relative to everybody else's. Like, oh, they had a better idea or more creative or more thoughtful or shorter, whatever it is, right? We're judgmental creatures. So helping people just type and then hit send all at once lowers that self-judgment voice. It also makes it like more likely that everybody is going to respond, right? Because sometimes when you're asking people to do it as they go, it's really easy to just say, there's been enough responses, versus I want everybody to do this and we're all going to hit send together. So chatterfalls or chat storms are really great ways to invite more participation in the chat specifically. You can also, and this feels like maybe a little silly to mention, but it's also like just something I don't see everybody do, which is if somebody shares something in the chat, say it and repeat it out loud into the room, right? Allowing that to be a way that people participate, you can still get their voice out loud, but they don't have to be the one that's saying it. So that kind of like echo effect, I think, is a really powerful way to increase participation. Another thing that I will have people do, and another way that I use chatterfalls, you can also do this with like really simple structures, like fill in the gap, which is a structure from facilitator cards that I really love. So fill in the gap creates like a really easy way for people to participate. So an example would be, what is one thing that you think every meeting needs to do? Like every good meeting always has blank, right? Or every good meeting always has blank, right? And then you could say, okay, everybody type in their response, 3, 2, 1, hit send, and then you'll have this big list of all of the things. And what's awesome is you can then invite more participation from that. You could say, all right, Sandra said donuts. Sandra, can you tell us why you think every good meeting has to have donuts? And what's awesome is like maybe that person didn't want to participate out loud already, but they said something that you think is interesting, and now you're inviting them to participate in a new way. So using chat as kind of like a low barrier initial way for people to participate, and then asking them to participate out loud afterward can be a really great way to build more participation. So we've got some ideas for how to use the chat in more interesting ways. Let's talk about another basic function of most video platforms, which is just having your camera on and off. So I mentioned I was going to give you a sneaky, maybe cool way, I think, to invite people to turn their cameras on. So I will do an activity that's as old as time on Zoom, which is called peekaboo. And this is how it works. I will invite everyone to make sure that they are in gallery mode. This won't look cool right now because you're only seeing me, but you're going to have to imagine it with like, 20 people's video squares. And I'll say, if you don't want to participate, that's totally fine. But to participate in this activity, you do need to have your video on, because this is how it works. I'm going to say a statement, and I'm going to ask everybody to take their thumb and put it directly over their webcam, right? And so all of a sudden, everybody's faces disappear, and you just have this big screen of thumbs. And then I'll say a statement like, take your thumb off the webcam if you enjoy pineapple on pizza. And then if that applies to you, you take your thumb off the webcam and you kind of peek out, right? You do a little bit of peekaboo, and then you say, okay, great. And we're going to reset and we'll do another question. And then you can go ahead and say, okay, take your thumb off the webcam if you've ever traveled to South America. And I haven't, so I didn't take my thumb off the webcam, right? So doing that as like a warm up helps people get their video on, reminds them that they're like physical bodies in space, and that their webcam is also like a physical object that they can like touch, and creates like a good reason to have your video on, right? Most of the time our reason isn't a good one. And this one actually, like, you can't participate without it, right? So that's a really interesting like way, I would say, to use the webcam. I used it as an icebreaker in my example, but you could also use it for, okay, I would love to know if people feel ready to move to a vote. So put your thumb over the webcam, take your thumb off the webcam if you don't feel ready to vote. And you could see, oh, okay, there's 4 of us who aren't feeling ready to vote. And then you could invite those people into a fishbowl discussion or into the hot seat in order to ask them for their voices more and kind of like make sure that they're the only ones that are talking because they're the only ones who have some resistance at that point, right? So I just named 2 other activity structures. Let's see here. Fishbowl and hot seat. For anybody who's watching, these cards, facilitator cards, are part of a box called facilitator cards. And basically they're different structures and ideas and frameworks for participation of different types, right? So these yellow ones are often for participation in discussions or to get people's questions on the table. One we talked about earlier, this blue one, fill in the gap, is often for getting people's kind of like emotions or initial ideas on the table. So there are 2 structures that you can use just the kind of video functions of the platform to invite participation. So one is Fishbowl. Fishbowl is a way to shrink the conversation down to just a few participants. So there are 2 ways to do this, using the spotlight feature, or if let's say you have 5 people and those are the people who are going to have a small group discussion in front of a large group, you could say, okay, I want everybody else to turn your videos off. Just those 5 people keep your videos on, and then you can instruct people to hide non-video participants. The way you do that is you find the 3 dots in the upper right corner of anybody's video who is off, and when you click that, there will be an option that says hide non-video participants, and that will shrink the room down to just the people in the fishbowl. And fishbowl is a really great way to like change up participation because not everyone has to participate in every conversation. Not everyone wants to participate in every conversation. So rather than making everybody go into breakout rooms, which is another great strategy for participation, sometimes we can say, you know what, just 5 people are going to have this conversation and the rest of us, our only requirement in this moment is just to listen, to pay attention and to like reflect on what's being said. So changing up how participation is done and using that technology, right, to like shrink the room with spotlighting it or hiding non-video participants is like a really cool way to create a new invitation and kind of style of participation. Hot seat's very similar in the sense that you're kind of just putting one person rather than a group into the fishbowl. You're saying, okay, John, you have some questions, or actually we have questions for John on, this initiative that's coming up. So we're going to spotlight John, and John's going to be the one that's going to be answering questions for the next few minutes. It feels totally different to give someone permission to take over a meeting versus when someone kind of grabs the mic and takes it for themselves. So those structures can be really, really helpful for ways to mix up participation and to keep people engaged. Because my biggest tip for keeping people engaged online is let me try it again. My biggest tip for keeping people engaged online is to invite different ways for them to participate throughout a meeting. So more than 5 to 10 minutes without a concrete way and kind of change for them to participate is going to be a high ask for their attention to be focused. When you are in an online meeting, you are in a distraction box. Like the computer is the world's most distracting technology. And for you to keep people's attention means inviting them to engage. And what I do is I invite them to engage in a lot of different ways throughout a session to ensure that if they did get distracted, they constantly are brought back, right? So we can do that with some of the activities that we've already talked about. And there is a ton more ways as well. So let's get into just a few more. Okay, we're going to kind of go from one extreme to the other. So one extreme is how can you increase the amount of ways people can participate with each other simultaneously? And then what are ways that we can actually get people to participate and engage, keep engaged, but be solo? So let's start in a moment with the getting people to engage and participate all together. And then we'll move to the how do we actually keep them engaged even when they're doing solo work. Okay, thanks for the water break, for understanding the water break. Okay, So getting people to be engaged all simultaneously and inviting kind of large group participation. So we talked about one of my favorite ways for large group participation already. That was in the chat. Another is, and I would say this is kind of like a creative use of the technology, is to do whiteboard responses or annotation. So whiteboard responses, the way you do that is by pulling up your screen share. There's actually a couple of different options here for screen shares. And if you've never poked around on this, I would highly encourage you to do that and to like look into the advanced like portion of a screen. So helpful when you don't want to share your bookmarks or like the fact that you have 500 tabs open. But we're just going to use this basic feature called whiteboard here. And I just want to make sure it's showing up correctly for you. Perfect, it is. Okay, so the whiteboard feature on Zoom is one of those that I just think so underutilized. So the whiteboard feature on Zoom is available for everyone, and people can also use it in the breakout rooms, which is like maybe a 201 level thing, but you can open up this and use this with your participants. So one of the ways that I've done that is I will draw a spectrum. You can also prepare this ahead of time if you want to, but if you have an impromptu idea, it's really quick to do that. I'll just do it on one line. Okay, so we're going to do a spectrum of strongly disagree. Bet you can guess what this one is. Strongly agree. And we've got a spectrum here now of strongly agree to strongly disagree. And what you can do is ask your participants to open up their annotation tool. So the way they do this is when you're screen sharing at the top, it will say, you know, your name is sharing their screen, and then it will say view options. This is for your participants. When you click view options, there will be an annotation option as long as you have enabled that on your side. So just make sure this right here is enable annotation for others. Just make sure that that is selected. So once that's selected, what they will see is this toolbar right up here. And I'll invite people to say, okay, go ahead and grab the stamp tool and place a stamp anywhere on the board, right? Just to make sure that people can use it. And some people will go crazy and throw a bunch of stamps up there, and you can clear all of those later. So, oh no, I cleared my, perfect. I don't want to clear everything. I just wanted to clear the stamps. Let's see if we can erase them. Perfect. Okay, so what's cool is you can then have people respond by placing a stamp. So I will say, okay, I think virtual meetings are just as good as online meetings. Strongly agree, strongly disagree. And everybody's going to stamp somewhere on that spectrum. And what that allows you to do is kind of get everybody participating, right? Again, if their attention has floated away to Twitter or their phone or whatever it is, like all of a sudden you're asking them to engage. And so they're going to be like, oh, okay, stamp tool, cool, all right, I'm pressing a thing, right? And they're back and paying attention again. And then you can expand that participation to say, oh, okay, Meg, I saw you put your stamp in the kind of strongly agree side. What made you put your stamp there, right? And use this kind of like low barrier participation to expand to a more like a bigger conversation. You could also bring this into breakout rooms, right? So another thing you could do is create a strongly agree, middle ground, strongly disagree option breakout room and allow people to select into the one that they place themselves into and have small group conversations on those different places. So this is like, there's so many options here for whiteboard and the uses, but I think this little hacky spectrum questions is one of my favorite ways to do it. And to get everybody's responses in, again, this like really low barrier, but still like active, engaging way. On the kind of, oh, now I'm doubled up. Boom. Okay. On the kind of other side of the spectrum when it comes to Zoom is having people do individual work, but having them stay in the Zoom to do it. And I don't mean in like a study hall way. I mean, if you're in the middle of a meeting and you were like, okay, I want to know like what everyone's favorite, 3 moments were from the last year so that we can really try to like expand on those and bring that into our work that we're doing this year. I want everybody to spend 5 to 10 minutes, like looking through all of the, videos and photos we took and, documents we created, and to pull out your best ideas. You could ask everybody to do that in the large room. My favorite way to do that is to actually do it in separate breakout rooms. So when you create breakout rooms, which I can't at the moment, oh no, they're there. You can create breakout rooms for like one for every person. So if you create, if you have 20 people and you create 20 breakout rooms and you assign them automatically, they'll each get their own space. And what I find is when people are in their own space, they have a different like level of freedom, and they don't feel as observed, which allows their kind of cognitive load to go down. But they're still in the Zoom meeting, right? Like, that they haven't you're not asking them to close the Zoom and come back, which would have a very different experience. So that kind of idea of like using individual breakout rooms, I think can be an incredibly powerful tool for asking people to participate, but still giving people like solo reflection time, which can be really great for people who are not out loud processors, for people who need a break from the constant input of others in order to think. That's like a completely different way to do it, but one that I think is a creative use of these kind of online platforms. It's a creative use of these online platforms, but still allows people to engage. So I'm going to take a look at I'm going to take a look and see if there's any other things I wanted to highlight here from the creative ways we can use the platform. We've got a couple others that are just kind of like honorable mentions. One is gestures. So just this idea of like, helping people know that these reaction buttons exist and they can press thumbs up, they can press heart. I think those can be really, really helpful. Having people raise their digital hand can be awesome, especially if you have a large group and you're asking like, does anybody have any questions? Throw it in the chat, or you can raise your hand. That's a really helpful one. And the last one I'll do for this moment is to just show you a new technology that is, I don't know if any of the other platforms are doing this yet, but Zoom just added this thing called avatars. And I was telling a friend about it because they have to have their video on to make sure that they're present, just that they're physically present in their space. But they really don't like to do that. And I mentioned there are avatars in Zoom. So if you go into Zoom, you choose video settings, and then backgrounds and effects. There's this new thing called avatars, and you can become a cow. My favorite is to also combine it with like, a cow appropriate background. And then you kind of feel like you're puppeting something, and it is such a different experience. I use this in my business when I have to do boring administrative tasks because the cow makes it more fun. So there are things that people just don't know exist on Zoom. And I'm not encouraging you maybe to like have everyone turn into a cow or whatever animal they prefer. I definitely I'm really a blonde cow with a hoodie. That's really my type. But this is like a creative use of the platform. And if people are feeling Zoom exhausted, or they need to be there and show you that they're physically present, because if you fall out of frame, the cow will disappear or freeze, apparently. Oh, there it goes. So right now I'm leaning out of the camera and you can't see me. And then when I come back, the cow will come back. So, that's an cow in space. That's an option that I just thought I would mention because it's fun. It's a creative way to use the platform and to get people to maybe somebody feels more participatory if they're not speaking from themselves, right? Maybe you could even do fun questions if everybody has their Zoom updated. Like, okay, I would love if you want to take... if you want to be somebody who's going to try to like poke holes in our solutions, I want you to be a fox. And if you're going to be somebody who's going to like really have like pure optimism, I want you to choose a cow, and like kind of do 6 thinking hats, but with different animal avatars. Sometimes we just need a little novelty, everybody, a little bit of joy in our virtual meetings. So we're going to continue this video series next week. We're going to continue and we're going to talk about what are the different options for external technologies. Today we explored some of the different ways that you can use the internal platform that you're hosting your meeting on, but what are the external technologies that can really liven up and keep people engaged? We'll go over some of my favorites and maybe even source a few from you. And then we're also going to talk about more structures that I think can really help, whether that's getting people to respond more when you ask questions or to participate who, tend to stay silent, or structures that help actually contain people who tend to take over meetings. We'll talk about even more of those different facilitator card options in our next video. So if you tuned in, I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned a lot. Please let me know in the comments your thoughts, perspectives, ideas, disagreements. I would love to hear all of it below. If you got something out of this video, give us a like, subscribe, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.